Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm a little late. I had a bit of trouble getting in. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am the head of the Egyptian Revolutionary Council, an organization that has existed since 2014 that's opposed to the military coup in Egypt. Our message is one that is directed to the inside as well as to the outside. We are opposed to any kind of military order or authoritarian order in the region, but our focus is primarily on Egypt since 2013. And we obviously advocate outside in Europe as in relation to what's happening inside. We meet with policymakers, we're active at a grassroots level, and we are engaged wherever and whenever we can in order to expose what I believe are crimes that are being committed daily in Egypt. I myself have had a verdict of 15 years passed against me for creating a bad image, as they put it, of Egypt abroad. So I have been charged in one of the main cases, which involves some leading figures inside and outside, some already in prison for 15 years. So obviously the company that I'm with today, many have suffered in prison, and I'm lucky to have been abroad, but at least the advantage of that is that we try to get our voice heard. I think that clip we saw is a reflection of Sisi's reactions in most cases. He is a dictator that consistently wants to enforce even more repression, even more control. He has a problem with the 2011 uprising, and when I hear him, I hear the tremors of revenge. He has said over and over again, we are not going to let 2011 happen ever again. You could argue that this is a man that is afraid. It's a dictator that knows he has to be in full control. I think the danger is that when he puts forward things like the national dialogue or the human rights strategy, some may think there might be a silver lining to it, but in reality, it's a cover-up. It's something he presents those who criticize him in the West for, and also makes life a bit easier for his partners, whether they be the United States or European Union countries, who whisper in his ear and tell him he's got to clean up his act. So he presents these different dialogues and initiatives. But as we just heard, over 1,000 are out of prison, and we of course welcome all releases. And then he arrests over 3 times perhaps the number again. This is an ongoing strategy. I don't think that these dialogues will actually lead us anywhere. If there is some benefit to them, then there is also a great deal of harm in them. The main thing, I believe, is that Western governments, it's not they're being duped, they're actually complicit. They know exactly what's happening. They want cosmetic changes that may help them engage with Sisi and make the regime look somewhat better, because he has been so exposed by human rights organizations outside, and they know that he needs to clean up his act somewhat. I agree with you, COP27 was a good opportunity. When the limelight is on Egypt, we find that in Europe and of course elsewhere, it is an opportunity to expose what's happening. And so with COP27, there was great disappointment that there wasn't the release of Ala Abdel Fattah, that there wasn't greater movement. But nevertheless, the exposure was there, the opportunity was there for greater exposure of what was happening in Egypt. Everything that has been said points to the fact that the cause is still alive. that everyone on this panel and so many elsewhere are saying that we want to be the voice of the voiceless inside, and we're not going to let this just cause die. But it's been 10 years, and I believe there needs to be political will in order to reach another stage. We have enormous talent that can promote the stories, the narratives that need to be better known and publicized among a public. But change either comes because it's forced on the international community, because there's a change in the balance of power on the ground in Egypt, or it can be aided by groundswell and mobilization outside, as happened in the case of South Africa. I'm not saying Egypt on its own is South Africa, but let me just go back to the issue of combining forces, which I think is so important and ought to be our strategic starting point, or at least it's one that I would promote. That if Egypt and Egyptians stand alone, they need to wait then for the change to happen from inside, and I believe it will happen. But there are so many suffering across the Middle East and elsewhere. We need to combine forces in the same way that the tyrants of the region combine forces against us. There needs to be real mobilization. I heard what Missy said, and I really, commend all the enormous work she does. And one thing she said that's very important is we need to ally with others. In the UK, we allied at a certain point with climate justice groups because of COP27, with anti-racism groups throughout the years of our concentrating on Egypt, with Stop the War that has stood with us. But it needs to take on a much more dynamic approach, and it needs to go beyond the borders of the UK and go towards and go to the United States. There can be mobilization on the ground, but we need to have a catch-all phrase. So basically what I'm saying is that there needs to be a united political platform of sorts in order to push us to the next stage. All the other work still needs to be done on the human rights front, through the enormous work done by human rights organizations, through the issue of culture and arts and all that. But in order to create mobilization at a grassroots level, there needs to be the coming together of different forces under some kind of, if you like, in quotes, political umbrella, in order to create some kind of mobilization at a grassroots level outside of Egypt, in the West, whether it be Europe or the United States. Otherwise, we will gain followers and sympathizers, but we can't really change the balance of power. Thank you. That's all I have to say. I just wanted to draw attention, obviously, to the issue of executions. And to say that we also need to speak out before things happen. Egypt is one of the leading executioners in the world. I believe, according to the last Amnesty report, maybe third in terms of executions. And there are a number of executions on the books, and then, so to speak, that may or not be ratified in September. And the issue of executions is one that's has been used by the regime to, again, revenge against particularly Islamist groups and leaders, but as also a fear-mongering device, and in order to get rid of and to weaken a particular political and social movement, namely the Brotherhood. But also the issue of executions is so grotesque, because in Egypt there is no justice system or real recourse to the rule of law. The military has used the judiciary as an arm. It's an arm of the military, essentially. And there is no such thing as a fair trial. So the issue of executions is one that we need to keep in mind, since we're talking about human rights here. The grotesque nature of how the Sisi regime uses that, and also the issue of taking action against family members of activists. This has been current now for some time, has increased. And so there is a means of trying to control activists by hitting out and imprisoning and threatening members of an activist's family. Thank you.